Hello and welcome back to State of the Division. And after a month off, the UFC returns with UFC 320. An actually really solid looking card on paper with fun fights dotted all throughout. 2 title fights, Ankalaev Pereira, Merab Sandhagen, both look really fun and promise really interesting matchups. Pereira's always a pretty heavy-handed fighter and always has a chance to win. Merab's a cardio machine versus a dude who's big for his weight class and throws that weight around. Emmet versus Zalal, interesting fight on that main card. I'm always a fan of Josh Emmet. He's always got a puncher's chance. Zalal's a very different fighter, a ground-focused fighter, loves the submissions. Gaitier makes a fight in this card. New opponent, but still fun to see him kind of come up and prove himself and try to build a name in the rankings. And even in the early prelims, you've got a few recognizable names throwing themselves out there to be in the card. So overall, I think UFC 320 should be a pretty fun return to the UFC. That being said, we do in fact have our housekeeping and butcher's bill. I went 5 and 6 on the last card, with 2 fights canceled and 1 random fight added last minute that I didn't know about. If I'm being honest, my biggest mistake was buying into Asakura and assuming that the struggles were just against Pantoja, and not buying into Murphy over Pico. That one was just a really bad read on my part. I really bought into the hype and what I read online. Either way, my overall record rolls to 66, 41, and 1, a startlingly mid record overall. And for the butcher's bill, at this point I only have 1. Ozzy Diaz is pulled out of his bout against Ateba Gaitier and is being replaced with Tristan Vines, making his UFC debut a month after his last fight. Well, a month and 4 days after his last fight. That being said, let's get right into it. Opening up 320 is the 9-5-1 Veronica Hardy, who is looking to right the ship against 7-4 Brogan the Bear Walker. Hardy is 7 years younger, either 1 inch shorter or dead even in height, with 3 inches of reach, heading towards Walker. Hardy looks to be a bit of a streaky fighter. In her wins, she looks to be a control-focused fighter who looks to slow down the fight and limit the offense. Does have a solid ground game that helps generate control time, though it only sits at a .93 takedown average with appearances in 2 of her 4 wins. She also seems able to work on her back or reverse positions to set up offense. Looking at the striking, she rolls with a grappler standard 3.12 to 3.48, where she doesn't really pull away from her opponents most of the time and can't really keep up if her opponents push the throttle down. Walker is coming off 2 straight losses, 1 by KO and 1 by decision, and honestly really hard to get a vibe for. In the broad strokes, I feel she's very similar to Hardy with 6 career decision wins. None of her numbers are great, with a 2.04 to 3.70 in the striking being solidly outpaced in both of her fights. Not to mention 0 takedowns and has been taken down 4 times in each of her 2 fights. The favorite here is Hardy, and I think I'm going to agree. Hardy comes in with a decent ground game, and that's something that Walker has struggled with so far in the UFC. I guess in the end, I'm saying I have more faith in Hardy to land takedowns and rack up control time over Walker to take that control from her and find a dominant position in this fight based on what we've seen in her last 2 fights. 12-5 Ramiz Brahimaj squares off against 13-2 Austin the Gentleman Vanderford. Brahimaj is 3 years younger at 32, 1 inch shorter with 2 inches in reach. Also going to Vanderford. Brahimaj is a submission-focused finisher with a bit of the killer bee decision style rolled in. 4 of his 5 losses coming by decision. Now, starting with the ground, he does seem to lead the action in his wins with a 1.99 takedown average. Also does seem to work quick, not really stacking takedowns too often, at most 2 in the UFC. However, he can be taken down and controlled with 2 of his UFC losses seeing him taken down 5 times each and being almost completely unable to get any sort of offense going. On the feet, he has a ground-focused standard, 2.14 to 3.81 average, where he's able to threaten just enough to keep pace in order to set up his ground game. Vanderford is weird to try and describe stylistically. Both his UFC wins are by KO, with 5 career KO wins. But those 2 UFC were also his first 2 KO wins since 2019, with the rest being rounded out by 3 submission and 5 decision. I guess overall he can best be called an all-rounder, capable of swinging on the feet and finishing there, while also being able to take control on the ground. Now, I don't know if he likes to lead the action on the ground. With 2 rear naked chokes and an arm triangle, it seems to go both directions, being able to defend or being able to lead an offense on the ground. And with striking, he seems to be a bit of a quick starter, finishing it before the second and more than capable of avoiding damage, with only 2 losses coming via finish. Favorite is Vanderford, but I really feel this fight's closer than Vegas gives it credit for, given that Brahimaj has that KO power and KO touch ability. And I guess with that, I'm going to gamble and go with Brahimaj here. I fully believe Vanderford can win this fight, but I don't know if he's going to be able to overwhelm Brahimaj like Garimbo and McGee did when they beat him. And even then, Brahimaj has had time to work on defending those stacked takedowns to get back to the feet. And with probably better striking than what I'm looking at with Vanderford, I think Brahimaj has the power touch to put him away if it goes there. This is a bit of a gamble, I can see this going wrong, but I just feel Brahimaj has enough to his name, enough in his favor, that he might be able to eke out a win or even get the lucky shot to win this fight. 11-4, Punahele Storytime Soriano looks for 3 in a row against 13-6 Nikolai Veretennikov. Soriano is 3 years younger with either dead even height at 6 flat or 1 to 2 inches in favor of Veretennikov, with 2 inches of reach also going his way. Soriano rolls into this fight as a heavy-handed striker with the ability to push the pace if he doesn't happen to end it early. Starting with the striking, he rocks a 5 flat to 3.88, highlighting his ability to push the pace, but also showing how quickly he's able to end fights and avoid taking shots. He has been caught once in a KO loss. That reads as more the price of doing business as a striker than a major weakness of his. In terms of the ground game, it gets a little weird, with a 1.47 average with very limited use, but a lot of success when he actually does shoot. 5 takedowns for 10 minutes of control time against Baeza back in 2024. He can be taken down and controlled, though it seems like he's been able to survive in some cases. Veretennikov hasn't had much success in the UFC, struggling to get his game plan up and rolling. Stylistically, he tries to be a heavy-handed striker with 9 career KOs, but hasn't been able to land his shots in the UFC. The result is that he's been finished once and beaten his other 2 fights. The ground game has also been inconsistent, with only 2 landed takedowns, both of which came in his UFC win. Soriano is the biggest favorite here, and I'm going to agree. Veretennikov just hasn't been really able to find a groove in the UFC. He wants to swing and throw power, but that's the wheelhouse that Soriano lives in, and he's found success there. And if it isn't power, it's pace mixed with a solid ground game that he's able to use to good effect. Those are both something that I've seen Veretennikov struggle with looking at his losses in the UFC. So in the end, I think Soriano's more in his wheelhouse in this fight, and Veretennikov's not going to be able to get him out of it or take control of it from him. 20-2 Patchy No Love Mix looks for his first UFC win against UFC newcomer 16-3-2 Yaka Masa Wiklacz. Wiklacz is 3 years younger with either dead even height or 3 inches in favor of Mix, with no idea in reach, but Mix is carrying 70 inches. Mix is a submission-focused finisher heading into his second UFC fight after a loss against Mario Batista. Now, as mentioned, Mix is a submission-focused finisher, 13 career submission wins, and a definite preference for that ground game with 2 KO and 5 decision wins rounding it all out. His UFC debut wasn't great, getting outstruck pretty heavily and not being able to get his ground game going against Batista, plus only attempting 1 total takedown that fight. Not being able to land that takedown seemed to really cause some problems for how the fight went through. Now, Wiklacz is making his UFC debut and looks to be a similar ilk. 10 career submission wins, though also more than able to play the part of a grinder with 6 decision wins. I want to guess that he focuses on landing takedowns and taking control that way more than playing off his back. I don't know about his striking numbers. With only 2 KO losses, he seems to be decent enough to avoid getting put away. Mix gets the biggest nod here, and I think I will be taking a gamble here and going with Wiklacz. This is more of a straight up gamble, but seeing how Mix struggled against Batista, attempted 1 takedown, wasn't able to get it, and really didn't go back to that ground game and wasn't able to get it rolling, doesn't fill me with confidence going against fighters that can match him on the ground or negate that ground game. And while Wiklacz is very much an unknown value here, I feel he has a comparable skill set to Mix and the ability to land these surprise submissions to also threaten the takedowns. So I think he can at least survive or match Mix on the ground, maybe even take control from him. And if he does, I don't really have faith in Mix's ability to even the odds on the feet compared to Wiklacz. So in the end, I'm going to go with Wiklacz on the straight gamble just based on how I really didn't like Mix's performance against Batista. Ending off the early prelims, we have 10-4 Macy Chiasson taking the cage against the 16-8-0-1 Yana Foxy Santos. Chiasson is a year younger at 34'3" or 5 inches taller based on the site you read, but Chiasson still taking 4 inches in reach. Chiasson rolls into this fight as a bit of a rounded finisher, her last 2 wins coming by second round KO and first round submission. She's really not focused on one specific aspect and seems to be a relatively solid across the board with a 3.49 to 2.68 on the striking. Doesn't seem to be a power puncher, leaning more into the swarming style where the quantity puts her opponents away. Now, she doesn't tend to get outpaced staying within sight of her opponent, and on the same hand, she doesn't blow her opponents out by a lot, keeping it overall pretty close from bell to bell. In terms of the ground game, she carries a 2.08, with it being a constant presence in her fights and something she falls back on when recovery or disruption is needed. Santos is a bit streaky, but looks to be much more of a grinder, with all 6 of her UFC wins coming by decision. She excels in slowing down her opponent and taking these large striking leads into the end of the fight. Now, in the striking, she works a 4.42 to a 3.07 average. Perfectly fine, but does show there is a decent amount of damage that comes back her way. That has gotten her outpaced and beat on the feet before, but in most part they're able to hold the lead down. With takedown, she has a .87 average and tends to land them rather sporadically, getting decent chunks of control time when she does. She's very good at finding ways to slow it down on the feet and get control time without going to the ground. Chiasson is the favorite in this fight with a narrow lead from Vegas, and I think I'm going to agree. I don't think Santos is out of this fight. She has a skill set that can take control of this fight, and definitely I can see her controlling Chiasson bell to bell. However, Chiasson seems to be more threatening in this fight. And while Santos likes to take the fight long, going all 3 rounds, that just gives Chiasson more opportunities to put it away, and you have to engage her throughout the fight to win. You want to step in and swing, I think Chiasson has the advantage. You want to go to the ground, we've seen Chiasson take control, take advantage, take the fight over there. And while Santos can do all of those things, Chiasson just seems a bit more threatening in those regards, so I'm going to roll with her in this fight. On to the prelims. We have 13-2 Daniel Wiley Cat Santos squaring off against the 9-0 Zombie Jr. Joo-Sang in his second UFC fight. Santos is 1 year younger, either 2 inches shorter or dead even across the board, with 4 inches of reach going to Joo-Sang. Santos comes into this fight with a solid ground game capable of controlling the fight and some finishing ability always lurking in the wing. Two of his 3 UFC wins come by decision, with 5 total decision wins, showing his ability to control the fight and prevent his opponent from getting everything going. In the UFC, we see that show up as a 3.03 takedown average with heavy use in each of his wins for solid chunks of control time. He doesn't have a whole lot of submission ability, with only 2 in his career and 1 attempt in the UFC. Now the main point of it is to slow down his opponent, allow him to build his striking lead. In that regard, he runs a 4.74 to 4.96, highlighting a fairly quick pace as well as the ability to hang in and endure punishment to keep landing damage. Joo-Sang is going into his second UFC fight and overall looks like a pretty rounded fighter, capable of ending the fight on the feet or slowing it down and dictating the pace for a decision win. In his UFC win, he only fought for 28 seconds before ending the fight with a KO. Don't really know about his ground game or how he responds to it, but I'm hoping to say he's at least average. It's about dead even across the board, so I don't have my easy way out here. But in the end, I think I'm going to roll with Santos here. My main logic is his ability to stack takedowns. I don't think he's going to stack 6 takedowns on Joo-Sang, but being able to stack any sort of number on takedowns in a round is a big advantage. It can win you a round, it can give you a major nod from the judges in the points. I think it's the one advantage he has here. I don't know about Joo-Sang's ground game or how he's going to respond to it, but if Santos can get it rolling, I think the needle moves very heavily in his favor. I don't know if he can match up in power with Joo-Sang. I don't know if that's going to matter, but I think Joo-Sang might have the advantage there. So I think Santos' ability to stack those takedowns and take those chunks of control time is his biggest benefit in this fight. And I think it's something he's going to have to rely on and should be able to rely on to win. 22-6-2 Chris El Guapo Gutierrez goes for 3 in a row against 13-0 ferocious Farid Basharat. Basharat is 6 years younger, 1 or 2 inches shorter with 4 inches of reach going back his way. El Guapo has been very much a grinder as of late, with his 3 most recent wins all being decision and his last 5 fights all going to the judges. He does seem to lean more on the striking and controlling his opponents on the feet, with his striking averages showing that off, a 4.59 to 2.65. Pushing a good pace while also minimizing the damage coming back at him. Hell, he hasn't been outstruck in the UFC since his debut in 2018. He does have some finishability with 9 career KO wins, but his most recent one was in 2022. The ground game has been something used to a decent effect against him, with most of his losses seeing him being taken down around 2 times and controlled. Does carry a .24 takedown average, but seems to be able to play off his back or reverse position, being able to win fights when taken down. Basharat is also a grinder, albeit much more focused on using takedowns to dictate the pace of a fight. A 3.97 takedown average highlighting that fact, in addition that there's a submission threat in his game, with 1 in the UFC and 6 in his career. I do have to acknowledge that the control time is all over the place in regards to the number of takedowns. 4 takedowns or 4.5 minutes against Victor Hugo, and 3 for 5.5 against Damon Blackshear. Striking numbers sit at 4.36 to 2.57, though most of his most recent fights have been fairly close. Basharat is the favorite here, and I find myself agreeing. Gutierrez has had difficulties against other fighters that shoot the takedowns and stack control time, something that Basharat seems to do every fight. I think Gutierrez is probably able to match on the feet, might be able to take the advantage there, but that ground game makes it feel like it's a bigger divide between them, and I think it's going to be a big decider in this fight, giving the nod to Basharat. 15-5, Edmund the Golden Boy Shahbazyn takes the cage against 24-7, Andre Sergey Piano Muniz. Edmund is 8 years younger, either an inch taller or a dead draw in height, with 3 inches of reach going to Muniz. Edmund comes across as a killer-be-killed fighter, capable of tagging you up on the feet or even tying you up on the ground. Starting with the striking, he runs a 3.74 to 3.62, very much highlighting that aforementioned killer be killed style and willingness to throw on the feet. Style is varied and has some serious power that seems to be able to come out at any point during the fight. Now, the ground game is very solid with a 1.69 average, but the deployment of it seems a bit all over the place. I can say it is used effectively when landed in fights. Behind that is a fairly dangerous submission game, though his last submission win was in 2019, and he actually was finished by arm triangle in 2024. Muniz is a finisher as well, but much more submission focused. 4 of his 8 UFC wins coming by submission. So starting with the ground game, he rolls with a 4.02 takedown average, with those being a constant presence in his wins. His last win was over Jun-Yong Park, seeing him land 11 takedowns for 9.5 minutes of ground control. Outside of that is his submission ability that always seems to threaten his opponent. Now he can be matched on the ground or even taken down first and controlled. In terms of the striking, works a grappler standard 2.04 to 2.33 that is completely effective, not exactly something that he overwhelmed his opponents with. Edmund is the favorite in this fight, and I think I'm going to roll with Vegas again and agree. My main logic is that the versatility of Edmund gives him a slight edge over Muniz. He looks good enough to at least match on the ground and possibly take control there, but matching seems good enough and definitely looks to be better on the feet with power to put people away that Muniz hasn't had recently and hasn't been able to find. All those things ticking a few more boxes in his favor than they do for Muniz in this fight for me. So I'm going to roll with Edmund. 8-1, Ateba, the silent assassin Gaitier, looks for his 8th win in a row against the late call-up. 10-3, Treston, the Black Mamba Vines. Even age across the board, dead draw on height. No idea on Vines' reach, but I can tell you Gaitier rolls into this fight with an 81-inch reach. Gautier is a striker with an absolute atomic amount of power, it seems, with all 3 of his UFC wins being KOs, with 2 in the first and 1 in the second, and looking overall, he's on a 7-fight KO streak dating back to 2022. As a striker, he rocks a 6.93 to 2.19 in the striking, speaking to his aggressive pace and ability to catch fighters quickly and put them away. He has been tagged up a little bit. With how explosive he is, it becomes difficult to truly keep him in a corner and limit his offense. Ground game is non-existent so far, 90% takedown defense being the only number in that category. Vines is the late replacement in this fight, as I've mentioned, coming in off a fight August 30th for the Alabama Fighting Championship. A win, mind you. As a whole, he looks to be a finisher with a penchant for striking, though he can win by submission, and decision as well. 6 KO, 1 submission, 3 decision wins total in his career. He has been finished on the feet a few times with 3 KO losses. The heavy favorite is Gautier, and I'm going to agree pretty quickly. He's had more of a camp. He's more rested and seems to have heavier hands coming into this fight. Vines really has to overcome a super short turnaround, a month and change, a few days, a super late call-up, we don't know if he was in a camp or training, and is given an opponent on a very hot streak. A lot is against Vines in this fight. If he comes out and wins, it's super impressive, but a lot is in Gautier's favor, and I expect him to kind of use all those facets to come out and win this fight. Starting off the main card, 28-6-1 Abus Magomedov takes the octagon against the 14-3 Joe Body Bags Pyfer. Pyfer is 6 years younger, either dead even in height or 1 inch in favor of Magomedov, with 3 inches of reach heading to Magomedov. Magomedov is another fighter that's a little weird to try and define, with 2 decision wins and 2 finish wins in the UFC. Trying my best though, he's a ground-focused fighter with submission ability and a looming KO touch that hasn't quite found roost yet in the UFC. Starting with the ground game, he works a 2.65 takedown average with at least 1 takedown in 4 of his 6 fights and takedowns in each of his last 3. He is able to generate chunks of control time off the takedown. As mentioned, there is a submission threat, but only 1 has landed in the UFC with 7 total in his career. A similar vibe can be said for the striking, where it carries a 3.21 to 3.68 with a grappler standard distribution and 1 KO in the UFC, but with 14 career KO wins. Pyfer is a bit easier to get a vibe for as a striking focused finisher who brings the power to all of his fights, with 4 KO finishes out of his 6 total fights and an additional submission win mixed in there. On the feet, he rocks a 3.74 to 3.20, showing a bit of a slugger's ratio there where he will wade in and take damage, but is also slightly weighted by a 121 to 92 loss against Jack Hermanson in the strike totals. Aside from that, he has done a fairly good job at minimizing damage. There is a bit of a situational takedown game with a 1.35 average, with takedowns only landed in 4 of his fights, with 3 of them being wins. Obviously, stylistically, he can be caught and has been slowed down before by takedowns, but I do have to acknowledge that he has been able to survive and get back to the feet. Pyfer is the narrow favorite here, and I think I'm going to agree. This might be another case of me buying into the hype, and Magomedov undoubtedly has a shot here, but the consistency of Pyfer gives him an edge in my mind. Magomedov has found success with takedowns against power punchers, but Pyfer looks like he has a good enough ground game to survive and get back to the feet, where he definitely has the edge here in this fight, I feel. I think he has slightly more power, and I think if he can keep the fight on the feet and keep it in his wheelhouse, he's able to take the edge there. 19-5, Josh Emmet looks for war against 17-5-1 Youssef, the Moroccan devil Zalal. Zalal is 11 years younger, 4 inches taller, with 2 inches of reach also going his way. Emmet here is the old hand with his UFC debut coming back in 2016, but starting his fighting career back in 2011. That being said, he is a pretty well-rounded fighter who's been leaning on the decision for 3 of his last 4 wins, but still has finishability lurking in the wings, able to come out at a moment's notice. Just look at his finish over Bryce Mitchell. The striking has been his focus with 3.75 to 4.46, which does highlight the few times he has been heavily outpaced, but also that he's never really pulls away that much. The power is a good equalizer, but if the power doesn't land, he has proven the ability to grind through a fight, though those have proven to go either way. The ground game's a little weird to judge with a 1.09 takedown average, and has had a bit of an infrequent appearance, with his most recent patch being 4 in a loss against Lerone Murphy. Zalal has been riding a hot streak lately and looks to be a submission-focused fighter, with 3 of his last 4 all coming that way. The takedowns are a major part of his game, with 8 of his 11 UFC fights featuring at least 1 takedown, and you see it with a 2.09 takedown average. Obviously, the submissions are a big part of his game plan, but he is also able to generate some control time there. Moving to the striking, he works a 3.07 to 1.80, a solid ratio, but we do see him matched in fights where the ground game struggles. So there is a reliance on the ground game to prevent his opponent from really getting rolling on the feet. Zalal is the Vegas favorite here, and I will be agreeing. I really wanted to pick Emmet to win this, but Zalal's game plan of slowing his opponent down is something that has worked against Emmet before, and Emmet has struggled while fighting from behind before. And I think Emmet might have the power advantage, but Zalal's done a very good job at avoiding the power blow coming back and finding ways to neutralize those fighters' offense and keeping them in his ground game for the longest time. All things Emmet struggled with and all things Zalal does well. I think Zalal has the advantage. 31-5-1 Jiri BJP Prochazka squares off against the
Houston, Texas. They attend to the werewolf of Texas.
Prochazka is 3 years younger with 2 or 3 inches in height in favor of Jiri, with 4 inches of reach also heading his way. Jiri is Jiri. He's a heavy-handed, high-octane, killer-be-killed finisher that looks to bring his power out in spades. Still a bit of a wild child when it comes to defense, which has led to him being caught a handful of times. Striking is his main focus, a 5.47 to 5.70 average, backed up heavily with his power and explosive style. Does have to rely on his chin a bit as the defense opens him up for blows in return. There is a semblance of a takedown game with a 0.60 average, but it very much seems to be a situational piece of his game plan that gets deployed based on the matchup. Rountree is a very similar fighter, at least in terms of being a striker with some crazy power in his hands and a very explosive style. You see the difference in numbers with a 3.79 to 4.24 in striking, though I feel that is somewhat weighted by 2 losses where he was outstruck fairly heavily, 102 to 49 and 127 to 61. But back to the positives, he has the ability to go long in the rounds, working for the decision win in his most recent fight. He has struggled with takedowns in the past, but hasn't been taken down in any of his last 7. Unfortunately, I don't know if that was fully his defense or mostly due to the matchup. Either way, he poses a threat throughout the fight, being able to catch his opponent with a single shot and put them away. The narrow nod here is Jiri Prochazka from Vegas, and I wrote the side live for this, because this was a really tough fight for me to call. Khalil is an odd fighter to get a grasp on now, and given that Jiri's the wild child, he's always kind of open to being finished. I think in the end, I'm going to go ahead and go with Jiri here. I think Jiri's riding a slightly hotter hand and has a slightly more high-octane pressure he puts out. Rountree can catch him on a return 100%. I think Rountree can win this fight, but I think Jiri's pushing a very quick pace, and while Rountree hasn't been taken down, if Jiri can threaten takedowns and not eat a knee to the face, I think he's able to take advantage there. If he can get it to the ground, he can set up submissions. He's done it before. We saw him submit Jacare Souza for crying out loud. If Jiri's able to put on a performance similar to that and avoid the worst blow possible from Rountree, I think he can take control of this fight and get a win that way. For the bantamweight title, 20-4 Merab the Machine Dvalishvili looks for title defense number 3 against 18-5 Corey the Sandman Sandhagen. Merab is a year older with 5 inches of height going to Sandhagen with 2 inches of reach also heading their way. Merab's ring name is basically dead accurate. He's a ground-focused fighter with solid takedowns and great cardio. Not really a finisher despite his most recent fight though. Looking at the numbers, he rolls with a 5.84 takedown average, highlighting a relentless pace and ability to take control time in droves. I do have to acknowledge that the control time isn't completely consistent, but even if he doesn't land it for a long time, forcing you to defend his relentless attacks without being able to attack is part of his game plan. He was matched in his fight against Magomedov, only barely leading the control time and only led significant strikes by 7, but he still got the win. In the striking, he's fine with a 4.31 to 2.48, showing his ability to do enough on the feet to outpace his opponents and threaten them to look out for more than his takedown game. There isn't much in terms of finishing power, but the ability to pepper his opponents and force them to pay attention to more than the ground is valuable. Sandhagen is a control-focused fighter as well, though without as much of a motor. He does seem a bit more heavy-handed with some explosive striking and heavy hands that can rock opponents if not finish them. Starting with the ground, he rolls with a 1.28 takedown average with takedowns in all but 4 of his UFC wins. He has the ability to stack them, but a lot of the time he's able to work off single takedowns to get the chunks of control time he needs. He can be taken down himself, but has proven the ability to survive and get back to his feet or take control himself. On the feet, he racks a 5.06 to 3.34, where he is able to outpace most of his opponents in addition to the power he can bring on in time. Merab gets the Vegas nod here, and I had to agonize over this fight a little bit. Sandhagen gives me pause being so much of a bigger bantamweight with such a controlling power-based ground game. I am, however, going to still pick Merab to win. I think Sandhagen has the puncher's chance. He has the power in his hands to knock people out. I don't think Merab's an exception to that. But we've seen Merab deal with height advantages before, and while Sandhagen is the definition of a large bantamweight, I think Merab's able to handle that and get him in a position to where he's constantly defending, not able to mount much of an offense, and kind of repeat a game plan like he did with Jose Aldo. If you're constantly on the back foot, you're not able to do much to deal damage or impress the judges, and Merab at least being active gives him the nod. Again, Sandhagen has a chance, I can't deny it, and I think he has a really good shot at winning this if he can get his game plan going. But I think Merab being able to go long for 5 rounds and put this ludicrous pace forward might get Sandhagen on the back foot early, or even trip Sandhagen up at the bad time and give Merab the edge to take enough rounds to win the fight. For the main event and the light heavyweight title, the champion, 21-1-1 Magomed Ankalaev, looks for his first title defense against the former champ, 12-3 Alex Poatan Pereira. Ankalaev is 5 years younger, 1 inch shorter, with 4 inches of reach, rolling to Pereira. I think the best way to describe Ankalaev is as a measured fighter. He's pretty well-rounded with KO power in spades and a completely functional ground game that he can call on when needed. Striking is the main focus, with a pretty explosive style and the ability to mix in kicks as well. Numbers-wise, carries a 3.66 to 2.46, highlighting that he seems to keep the fight relatively slow, lower significant strike totals for both fighters overall. In that regard, he sort of seems to pick apart his opponent while not letting them get much started in return, not letting them step in to swing and bang or getting into these wild fire exchanges. The ground game has been a little absent as of late, with his last landed takedown coming in a no contest against Johnny Walker in 2023. However, when he does land, it's been very effective to set up control time or just bury his opponents a bit more when he has a lead. Pereira is a bit of a different story, much more of a heavy-handed finisher capable of putting the lights out in an instant. And with that power, he packs an explosive style that can catch his opponents in a flash mixed with a variety of strikes. In the numbers, he rolls with a 5 flat to 3.50, showing his ability to both end quickly and rack up the strikes over his opponents. He has been finished once in the UFC, but since then his only loss was a decision against Ankalaev. He does have a small weakness with the ground game where if a fighter is able to take him down, they can get some control time, but he has been able to minimize the damage and get back to the feet. Ankalaev is the favorite here. This was another hard fight for me to pick, but honestly I'm hard-pressed to pick against him. Pereira has the KO power, yes, and it can come from anywhere, yes, but it's the way that Ankalaev slows down the fight, controls the fight, and really prevents you a lot of those counter exchanges that Pereira excels in. Pereira has to be the one to engage. Ankalaev's content to sit back and take his pot shots. Pereira has to step in and engage, which opens it up for Ankalaev to do his thing of quick little flurries and back out of it and work the range, work the slower pace again. And in that regard, I think it's a very similar fight to the first time where Ankalaev's able to take control. Not to mention that I don't think Ankalaev had a landed takedown in their first fight. And if he's able to land and get his ground game mixed in, I think Pereira has more problems to deal with, and I think Ankalaev just has more of an advantage. So in the end, that's UFC 320. A fun return from a month off for the UFC, and honestly, I think a pretty solid card overall. Those two title fights are really fun. Gaitier is going to be fun to see. Chiasson is always a fighter I like seeing pop up on cards. And I think all throughout this card, you have a few interesting guys that are in positions to start making a name for themselves and to start being more contenders in the UFC. But in the end, that's just my opinion. So go ahead, tell me what you think in the comments, like, subscribe, do whatever. And in the end, have a good fight.